Hello, everyone, and welcome to How Grief is Impacting Your Clients. My name is Katie.rossler. I'm a transformative grief guide, licensed counselor, author of the book, The New Face of Grief, and now second book, Giving Birth to Motherhood, and creator of the Legacy Growth Certification Program. Today, I have Keltie Maguire. She's a clarity coach, and we're going to be talking about how she's working with her clients who are looking to have greater direction in their lives. Keltie, thank you so much for being here, first of all.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited and intrigued by what this conversation will hold.
Me too. I think we're going to dive into some really good things and hope that we'll have a chance to be able to share our own stories of times where we've sought that clarity as well. Yeah. So share with us a little bit more about what you do, who you serve, and where you do it from.
Yeah, so I am what I call a clarity coach, which in its most simple terms is I help people get clarity more specifically in terms of what it is they want. A lot of the clients who come to me are feeling stuck either in their business or their career, asking themselves questions like, what's next for me? Is this as good as it gets? I want more. Am I allowed to have more? The word that always comes to mind is like, I need clarity. And so they seek my support as far as helping them figure out what it is that they not just want, but what they really want. So really getting to the core of their desires. And then how are they going to realize that? What's that going to sort of manifest as in their real life? So like I say, it's predominantly small business owners, professionals. I've recently been sort of foraying into this question of, do I want to have children? Which is a huge question, of course, that we as women and men, of course, as well, ask ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I do it all online. So I've got a super international mix of clients. I'm in Munich, like you yourself. And yeah, I do it through the powers of the internet.
Yes, thank you, internet. And you're originally from Canada, correct?
I am, yeah, I'm from Vancouver.
And how long have you been here in Germany?
It's funny, I was telling someone the other day, I said, is it coming up on 4 years or coming up on 5 years? And I believe it's actually coming up on 5 years already in the spring. So.
Awesome. I tell you, that 2020, I feel like negated a year for all of us.
Totally.
Like,
yeah.
What year is it? Yeah.
100%.
Good. Well, what are some of the focus areas? You mentioned kind of career and like business clarity, like what do I do next? But what are some of the focus areas you find when you start working with clients start to come up?
Yeah. So, looking at decisions and how we make decisions is a big one. And I see a lot of people, my clients have the privilege of choice as far as they feel like there's a myriad of different things they could be doing or choosing, a myriad of different ways that their business could look or like next steps that they could take. And they really feel paralyzed by this choice. And there is often this underlying belief that like there is one right choice, there is one right path in life, and that tends to definitely get people tripped up. I would say a lot of it too also ties into external pressures, whether they acknowledge or recognize them as that or not, but what the best path for them is in accordance with what they see other people doing, how other business owners are running their business, what the expectations were in the home when they were growing up. What's considered a good, valid profession. And then a lot of pressure they put on themselves as far as, for example, like I've invested too much in this path, not just financially, but invested too much as far as really, the time and the energy, the blood, sweat, and tears that they put into a particular path, feeling like they're going to be disappointing themselves and other people if they make a change or if they do things differently. So, and then of course, all like the underlying fears that come up around that as far as, am I going to screw up? What if I get this wrong? What if I fail? What if this is the wrong move? So it's definitely like a complex and multi-layered process.
So they come with like, I need more clarity in like my career and the direction I'm taking. And what you would do is uncover that there's a lot of ambiguity or gray zone in the rest of their life too.
Totally. Yeah.
It's a whole other layer.
Definitely. And that's always that starting point for the work that we do is as much as somebody might say, I'm really unhappy in my job. Like I got this promotion and on the surface, things are going well, but I feel like I'm working too hard. I feel dissatisfied. It's not quite what I thought it would be. And we always want to like take like this kind of 360 degree or like zoomed out approach and be like, okay, that's fine. I understand you're struggling in that specific area of work.
Yeah.
How do you want your life to look? Like, where are you actually going? What is it you're building? What matters to you? How do you want to spend your time and your energy? Because we want to then basically position whatever area of life we're seeking clarity in that bigger context of our lives. Yeah. And I mean, it's mostly on that business front. I help people, but that's going to apply if you're looking for clarity and direction in a relationship. Like, do I stay? Do I go? What's the future look like with us? It's going to look the same if you want clarity in terms of, like I say, that question, do I want kids? It's first of all, looking at life as a whole and really looking at, like, what are my values? What's important to me? And I think this question, what do I want, is something that we are so unaccustomed to asking and finding answers to.
Well, and I'm realizing as you're talking, a lot of it is like their identity that they have developed and almost conditioned based on others, based on what they were raised to believe, their culture and things like that. And then they hit this maybe pinnacle and they're like, okay, this is not what everybody like told me this would be. I didn't sign up for X, Y, Z because I'm not getting these things. And that creates a lot of the struggle with finding clarity when you don't feel authentic to yourself, when you feel like you kind of had to wear sort of the wolf's clothing, or this other outfit of, I'm going to be like you guys want me to be, versus authentically, this is who I am inside. And it looks nothing like what you want me to be, whether that's in a relationship, whether that's with family or even career.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into hidden grief, because you've already said a whole lot of stuff that made me go like, there it is. But let me introduce what hidden grief is for those of you watching who may be not familiar with this term. Hidden grief is not grief necessarily related just to death and loss. It's the grief related to us letting go of the way we thought life would or should go, which was a lot of what Keltie was talking about, right? Understanding that sometimes we are conditioned, most times we are conditioned throughout our childhood, through our education systems and our culture, to think and feel and want certain things. And often once we start to pull those pieces away and see what's left, there's a lot of grief work that has to be done, because sometimes it feels like a lot of time and energy was spent believing and thinking one thing, and then you realize you actually don't really think that anymore or want to. So hidden grief is really us learning how to accept how life is in front of us and really decide how we can start being more mindful, living in the present, and enjoy how life actually is. So Keltie, what are areas of hidden grief you already are starting to recognize before I share some of the stuff I've noticed from what you said?
Yeah, well, it's so funny because, perhaps like some of your other guests, I thought, okay, well, how am I going to speak to this notion of hidden grief, and like, how is this actually showing up for my clients and also for myself in my own life? And it's really interesting because when I made the decision to close my last business, I was a jewelry designer for, a somewhat lengthy period of time. One of the big things that I really had to come to terms with was this feeling of grief that business had not looked and felt and ultimately been the way that I had hoped for it to be. And there was a lot of disappointment, both in the circumstances I found myself in, disappointment in myself, whether that was, valid or not. But I had to recognize, and that's something I encourage my clients, like, even when you come to this point, you say, you know what, I need to choose again. I need to choose differently. I want life to look differently now. I think we need to honor and recognize, like, there is a grieving process that happens with closing a door. And just because there's grief doesn't mean it's necessarily that wrong thing, but I think we owe it to ourselves to like take some pause and be like, wow, A, I've had disappointments. B, there was, with this business, for example, there was like a lot of beauty and growth and amazing connections and relationships that happened. So to also be able to honor it and say that was a really amazing chapter of my life. I think when we close doors, we sometimes think that it's like totally, making what happened like not of significance. It's saying like, well, that didn't matter. Like, it's like this feeling of, if I end a relationship, everything we had was worth nothing. And that's actually not true. So recognizing how those experiences have like really built and helped shape who you are, I think is super important. And just us talking about it now, I hadn't thought about it in the lead up to our conversation, but I was like, that's what it was. It was this feeling of grief that I had to process and come to terms with when I made this change into doing what I'm doing now.
Totally. We forget that an upgrade or that transition always means a letting go.
Yeah.
And you have to honor that. We also forget that when the door shuts, we also bring the manual of everything we've just learned to that next chapter. And there is so much that we learn, even when things don't work out the way success might look like, in our minds or the world would tell us. There's so much we can really bring to that next piece of the puzzle. And that's the value in growth. But we forget that because that's not, money symbols. That's not prestige. That's not authority building. And I can say without a doubt that this transition from you going from jewelry into the work you do now helps you immensely. And sitting with people in their transitions, because you know how that feels. Yeah. So not that you wouldn't have been able to do that had you not gone through it, but you are able to hold space even more for someone because you know what it feels like to have to do I really let go? Am I ready to let go? Who am I without this? Yeah. What does this new version of me look like? So I think that's that powerful reminder. We do carry everything we learned, if we choose to, with us to that next piece. Well, you mentioned sort of that fear of what's next prior in the very beginning. Your clients are like, I don't know, what do I do? What's next kind of thing. And I think often hidden grief shows up in the fear of failure, in the fear of rejection, and the fear of losing more because we're in this sort of scarcity mindset that things are taken from us if we don't do the right thing or the right way. And we really forget the trial and error part of life. Yeah. That it's kind of like, well, let's try this. Does it work? But we're constantly told to be efficient and effective and not waste time. And that creates so much pressure. And especially if you grew up in a high achieving home. And I'm sure a lot of your clients are high achievers that are like, why isn't this happening for me? Why isn't this? And you have to sort of say, does that even work for me? I know the women I work with, specifically the entrepreneurs, are all high achievers that are like, this doesn't feel the way I thought this would feel. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, because it wasn't really your dream, was it? Where did that come from? So being able to grieve that piece of, will this work out if I take a step outside of the norm and try something new?
Yeah, I totally agree. And we sound like we work with very similar types, and maybe those are the people who seek coaching and therapy and whatnot. But yeah, there's definitely this drive for perfectionism, for getting it right, for not living in being able to be in uncertainty. It's an emotion or an experience that I think is not talked about and not really acceptable for most people. Is we want to have clear knowing. And when we're unsure, there's almost this embarrassment of not knowing. It's there's so much, especially outward show of being all in, having our passion, feeling fulfilled, nailing things the first try. And that's just not the reality for most of us in our lives, in any area of our lives.
Yeah. And sitting with the uncomfortable. And that's the piece I think you were sharing as well in your chapter of letting go of the jewelry business and moving on, was it's uncomfortable. Yeah. And you're able to help people not be alone in that uncomfortability. Okay, you're seeking clarity and you're trying to figure out the next step, but you're not alone. Yeah. And when we feel alone, we panic even more because it reminds us of times in our past where we felt alone. It was all on me. I had to figure this out. And we have to grieve those moments, probably as kids, where we did feel alone. Yeah. And say, okay, well, I'm not now. And I've sought out support and now I can do this. So I love what you do. You know this. I've spoken to it, but I think often we forget that we do not have to walk this path of trial and error without some type of roadmap or clarity, or I call it a lighthouse, some light shedding, here's options. And options, we love options. Think about going to the store, everybody. When you go to the store, there are so many options. We love options, but we don't always love options when it's about decision-making in our lives. We want it to be simple. Yeah. And I think that's what working with somebody, a coach, a guide, a counselor, to simplify the process and remove all those voices that actually weigh us down, I think is really big. What are some of you said external influences earlier. What are some of the things that come up time and time again that you're like, wow, this really impacts people more than they think?
Yeah. Certainly social media is playing a huge role as far as really just seeing the exterior of running a business. That sort of shiny outside. And one thing I sort of relate, or the experience that my clients have, is this notion that like on the outside things are working, but inside they're not, behind the scenes. So, and also having something work, having something, like function from a strategic perspective in business, for example, i.e. making money, showing up, being seen, getting positive feedback. It's not the same thing as things actually working for you, as in things feeling good, things fitting with your life, having that balance that you want, what have you. So, certainly external factors are feeling like everybody else has got it figured all out. I'm the only one who's feeling stuck. I would say, I can't tell you the number of people who have an initial consultation with me who are like, this is probably the worst thing you've ever heard, right? Like my situation is more sticky, more screwed up, more confused than anybody else's. And it's like, no, we are all in the same boat together. Certainly ideas of what success actually is, what it entails. And we see that especially being prevalent in the business world. What makes a successful entrepreneur? What makes a successful professional? Whether it's true or not, but like seeing things modeled in our families, as far as, I'll use myself as an example. Like my parents have been always very supportive of me, but I saw a very traditional path of like, you go to school on time, you become a doctor, that like this, white collar profession that's kind of that safe, valid road. Whereas me being like, oh, I'm like an entrepreneur, I'm doing all these different things. It's like, it was not within the norm in our family. And even though I've had that outward acceptance, I think for myself to feel like it's valid has been in like a different part of that process. Equating money with success and having done well. That's something I've certainly had to sort of struggle through over the last several years myself of entrepreneurship. And that's also something that I saw modeled for me in my family. So feeling like, and again, some of these external factors, they're maybe not real, but this sort of imagined notion that I know for me with my jewelry business, like my customers are going to be disappointed. Other people in my industry will think that I'm a total hack and I didn't make it. So it's this question, like, what will other people think? What are, everybody's looking at me. I'm under the spotlight when really for the most part, people are focused in on themselves. Right. And frankly, sometimes people will be disappointed, but helping people attune themselves to their inner compass to say, myself, my own happiness and fulfillment has to come first, and that it's not selfish, but it's ultimately serving not just to me, but to the people in my life as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I've shared this to my community, this story so I went to school for physics pre-med. I was going to be a doctor. And 6 months in, I was like, these are not my people. I was way too social. I loved study groups because I wanted like chit chat. I didn't really want to do the work. And then I was taking like a general psych class and was like, oh my gosh, you guys are my people. You love like talking and analyzing and studying. And I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I'm changing my major. And that was an interesting phone call because she was really disappointed. And I was proud of myself for standing and going, no, I know this is what's right for me. But it is very easy for a lot of us to go like, well, maybe I've done something wrong when our parent is disappointed, or a good friend or our partner. So I think it's so true that you're saying, like, there's those prominent voices in our lives that we really like, oh, if we've disappointed them, we've done something wrong, instead of, no, that's their stuff. And it's okay. And we can still be listening and be true to ourselves and disappoint someone else. I can totally sit in her shoes and go like, okay, she probably was like, no, you were going to be a doctor and you would have it all figured out. And you would never need to depend on a man. And, like all these things. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go into psychology and maybe be a counselor. Just like, okay, great. So if we can remove ourselves sometimes from who is disappointed and say, why are they disappointed? Oh, that's about their stuff. That can remove that baggage as well, and allow that to be separate from our own decision making, which I think is important. So, well, very cool. Well, let me ask you this then. What do you find that coaches are missing in terms of education around hidden grief, in order to be able to help their clients more in understanding and navigating what grief is bringing into their lives?
Probably everything related to that, as far as, this idea or notion in the first place. I mean, I certainly think that most coaches are going to be attuned to the fact that past experiences we've had, beliefs that have sort of been created and laid, that those influence us. Coaching as a profession, one thing I love about it, it is very forward looking, and it has that, gives people that sense of agency of like, what can I do in the here and now, regardless of what's happened. I think there is more looking backwards and more recognition of like past traumas and events and experiences and how those have shaped us, and the fact that we need to often do work around that in order to move forward. But I do think there's probably a lack of tools in how to do that, and how to do that safely, and how to have those difficult conversations. It's something that I personally don't feel very well equipped to do. And I think part of it is it feels like it's kind of bordering on or getting into that realm of therapy, which, requires a whole other set of skills and tools and know-how in order to be able to have those conversations safely with people. Because when we're looking at past grief, oftentimes that's around experiences that have been, like you say, they haven't always been major as far as what we'd consider to be a grief experience, right, but they often have been. And just because, I know myself, I've sometimes done this, is like, oh, well, for example, in my childhood, I didn't have anything that one might consider to be like a capital T trauma. That doesn't mean that was any less impactful for me as a child, like you say, to have felt, unsafe, to have felt not seen or heard. And so I think for coaches, being able to, even if it's not necessarily being able to fully navigate the way through that, to be able to identify it, being able to have, basic tools to then be able to point people in the right direction. And also wanting to, I think it's tough because you don't want to create like a divide or a divorce within that coaching relationship, to say we're not talking about that stuff, but to also know the boundaries of what you're going to be able to help and support with, and where you say, hey, I think it would be really helpful to engage someone like yourself to have certain conversations.
Right. The power of just naming it.
Yeah.
Keltie, is like what you were saying about like, hey, I realized I needed to grieve, and I didn't realize it at the time that it was grief, but that's what it was. Yeah. Even in a session for a coach to say, it sounds like you're grieving this, can be for a client, because it creates that whole new set of vocabulary. You don't have to go down the grief work, necessarily, but you can start to help them to better label. And I think that sometimes gives more clarity too. Like, oh, totally. That's what that is, versus just, I feel like this fogginess over me constantly and I'm not quite sure. So yeah, I agree with you. I think there are ways that there's a beautiful balance of education for coaches around grief that is appropriate. And then seeking partnerships. I think coaches and clinicians can do a better job of seeing where they can support each other and refer, versus like, no, I do this or you do this kind of thing. Yeah. Like, hey, this is a more fluid, holistic way for us to help clients. Yeah. I think that's a great thought. So Keltie, how do people find you if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah. Well, all places under my name, Keltie Maguire, which I guess you'll probably have here on the screen when this is broadcast.
Yes.
So I don't have to spell it out. KeltieMaguire.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn as well as Instagram under the same name or handle. And you can always book a call to connect, see if there's a potential fit and if I can support you. And I have a lot of free resources as well, like my podcast, the Clarity podcast. I've got some 4 simple questions people can ask themselves for more clarity and direction that they can get on my website. So
awesome. Yes. I'll make sure I have the link for that too, so people can get it. And then last question I ask everyone, what is the funniest experience you've had as a clarity coach?
Oh gosh, that's such a funny question to ask, because I certainly have like lots of laughter and play in my relationships with my clients. I can't think of like a specifically funny haha experience, but I did have something somewhat recently where I thought, it was probably not funny in a laughter way, but like, oh, okay, I see what's happened here. But I had somebody book a consultation with me, and I have quite a clear disclaimer that for initial consultations, I have a 5-minute grace period if you're late. Being a reasonable person, I tend to wait 10, but it's like, I like to say, 5 minutes, and they kind of check it off. Yes, I understand, and no-shows generally will not be rescheduled. Again, so what I typically do after a few minutes, send a quick message just saying, ensuring that we haven't got our wires crossed, or, sometimes we lost the Zoom link. if I get a genuine response that's like, you know, A, I totally blanked, or B, I'm really sorry, something's come up, I'm usually good to reschedule. But I had this person didn't show up, went to go send her a message, and I was thinking her name sounds kind of familiar. And when I went to type the message, I realized, oh, her email address is already known by my Gmail. So I went back into sent items. She'd done the identical thing about a year prior, had no showed an appointment, had never responded to my message, and somehow she snuck in and booked another call. And you know, we could probably dissect what might be going on for her there to like be booking these appointments, kind of this cry for help of like, I need, you know, her intake was very like, I need help, but hadn't seen things through. But I had to kind of shake my head because I'm like, oh, here we go again, you know. But it's also interesting to see how people's patterns really can repeat themselves, and to know for me, like it's really nothing personal, but I had to think about how many other coaches she's like booked calls with that have you know, fallen through. So
Keltie, I feel like, now that you're saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, like over the last 11, 12 years, like, yes, you're right. There's these patterns and you're like, oh, they're just being themselves. Like,
yeah, totally. So I need my system to flag it. It's like you usually I just remember, but like I say, it was probably a year or two back. I don't even know if she would have remembered. She might have thought, yeah, I still need clarity. I should talk to this person.
Right.
It did kind of it made me think of that saying, you know, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. No shame intended to them, but I thought, okay, this one's on me.
Now your system knows. Thank you so much, Keltie, for sharing today, sharing your personal story, sharing about your clients and the work that you do. If you're watching this and you'd like to learn more about hidden grief, I encourage you to go to my website, katie.rossler.com, and click on certification program to learn about the Legacy Growth Certification Program, where I teach you how to work on hidden grief, no matter what field you're in of coaching, mental health, and also healers. I make sure that you are able to tailor my methodology to the work you do so your clients can use their grief as their greatest tool for growth. Thank you again, Keltie, and I'll see you guys next week.